Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala barakatuh. Alhamdulillah rabbil alamin, wassalatu wassalamu ala syarfil anbiya wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Alhamdulillah, I'm going to give you some more ideas on how our mental model, developmental of our mental model, and then the triggers that cause and effect in terms of what we experience in terms of maybe psychological problems, or the whole range of psychological problems, or the whole range of living and dying is actually within this perception of mental models that we are creating in our four areas of our existence. That means the spiritual, emotional, mental and physical self, the domains that Allah has given us. Alright, I have given you some idea of this idea of mental models and how it affects our thinking style, the negative thinking style or the unhelpful thinking style, and how this mental model actually affects a lot of the psychological problems that we face today. So today I'm going to give you some idea of how anxiety, mental models and cause and effect within our whole idea that which we can develop, because mental models are what that we grow on. Now, what is a mental model? First, we have to define what is a mental model. A mental model is what we perceive to be as our being. All right, we have many mental models. The moment we are born onto this earth, we have various types of model in terms we perceive. These influences I have mentioned to you is from the environment, from the intrasocial and intersocial. Go back to our model. All right, the detail of which is in the book, and our inner speech. So the whole development of mental models, especially for psychological problems, there will be trigger, and usually this trigger is negative. So if you have anxiety, your mental model is based on fear. Alright, so your default mode is what? Your default mode is for anxiety is fear. You have fear. So this fear, if it is a normal fear, it is okay, because we have a range. For example, if we talk about being fearful, every human being that is alive today will have a certain amount of fear, because that is an existential question of our own survival. So we are built in at the default point. Our mental model is to be fearful. For example, if we go to an area we are not familiar, we are fearful of being mugged or being attacked. Alright, this goes back earlier on in our tribal society, that if we go into a territory that is belong to another tribe, then we may have our head cut off. Alright, so you have a tremendous fear there, because that is a matter of question of life and death. But now that kind of fear has been minimized, but we have other kind of fear that we built in within our life. And this fear, if it is a normal fear of we taking precaution, then it's okay. But if the fear involves, for example, fear of bacteria or fear of virus, and you wash your hands over and over and over and over, each time you wash your hands you say you're not clean, and then you do it over. There's OCD, obsessive compulsive behavior. And this OCD is triggered by what? There are triggers that's affecting this abnormal fear, abnormal worry, abnormal situation that we call anxiety as an overall purview, because that includes post-traumatic stress disorder. It includes also many other ideas of social phobia and fear of things that are irrational. Alright? For example, if somebody has a fear of snakes, it is a fear of snakes, but how likely is that person is going to be in contact with snakes in a modern world? For example, if you are living in the bush, alright, you are in contact with poisonous snake maybe once in a month. But in a modern world where there's no snakes around, but you have a fear of snake, maybe the trigger comes in because at a certain phase in your life, and this happened to a lot of children, they were brought to the zoo and they had an episode with a snake that is very frightening. Suddenly that trigger this fear. So this fear is developed subconsciously because maybe the showmanship of the person who is doing the snake is the snake is writhing around that person, and as if that person is dying, he's being squeezed. Actually, it's not. It's just a show. But that show triggers in that child who's not ready yet to face that fear, becomes a lifelong fear of snakes. The same thing. People have other fears. Fears of, for example, height. Fears of flying. Fears of whatever that you see. There are triggers. So that's why it's very important as parents, we got to make sure that we do not allow this trigger to be exacerbated. For example, we have small issues like a child being afraid of a cockroach, and then the parent make a joke out of that. Why are you so afraid of this? And then take the cockroach and throw at that person. And that child was not ready, mentally not ready. So that became a phobia. And each time you have a cockroach, the boy who is tough and strong and all that, will jump on the table and then shout, just fear of a cockroach. But what are the mental model that was created because of the trigger? So that's why this whole idea of mental model is a very big issue, in which we should be able to then develop positive mental model, because normally this negative mental model that causes this fear, that is affected by the trigger, is something that is subconscious. So we have to go back and find out what are the triggers. All right? And if we can find out the triggers, then we can know the cause and effect, because with these triggers, we can know why that person is acting with OCD, or why that person is acting with social phobia, or why that person is acting because they have stress. For example, like post-traumatic stress disorder is quite easy, because if you find out what are the trigger would be a stressful situation in a war, for example, where a shell just blow in front of his face and 10 of his friends died and he survived. He was blown, but then he did not die. So that mental picture of 9 of the friends being blown to death in a bomb is enough to cause the flashback. All right, so that person mental model is post-traumatic stress disorder, is because that flashback is becoming the cause and effect. So they will have this fear, and this fear then become flashback. And this flashback is what we call from the trigger, it brings the flashback, and this flashback again bring the cycle of fear. So you have this whole cycle of fear and more fear, and then your mental model will be then very, very negative. So how are we going to resolve our anxiety if we do not resolve the issue of the trigger, the cause and effect, and then the mental model? And this is something that we need to discuss, because this is an approach which is holistic. That's why within the Islamic perspective of positive Islamic cognitive behavior therapy, we are bringing this idea of mental model, and how mental model affects, your mental model affects everything, because this is where in our model we have what we call inner speech. Inner speech. Okay, this is positive. We have to develop positive inner speech, or we have what we call the negative aspect is mental clutter or automatic thoughts. They are all the same thing. This is the negative aspect. This is what we call the positive aspect we are trying to bring. But mental clutter, automatic thoughts, or inner speech, they are one and the same thing. It's only whether we are framing it in terms of the cause and effect, whether it is more towards positive or more towards negative. So I'm giving you this idea because this is a very wonderful approach in terms of post-Islamic cognitive behavior therapy, because the whole explanation in terms of cognitive behavior therapy does not go that far. All right, within the Islamic perspective, we can go that very far, because the inner speech that you're talking about is at the level of SEMP. SEMP. That means we have the input from the physical, the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual. And this input will then allow us to develop a positive mental model. So we can develop a positive mental model with a positive inner speech. We develop a negative mental model out of fear. All right? So, by giving you an idea, we can do a lot of research. All right? Which within cognitive behavior therapy, this is an issue they are trying to struggle with, but because they are only working on the biopsychosocial, that means the 3 level, they are not looking at the spiritual input of that person. They may have, say, 60 or 70% success in overcoming negative mental model or in transforming the triggers and working on within the cause and effect to be more positive. So I'm just giving you an idea because every one of us will have this mental model, and this is a progressive thing. Whether we are progressing towards closer and closer towards balance, that is al-ummah wasata, towards peace, tranquility and happiness, or closer and closer towards anxiety, fear and disaster. Each and every one of us, like it or not, will have a built-in mental model, and it is our duty to find a way out of the negative situation that we face. And inshallah, if we can understand this, how mental model is affected by trigger and how the excessive fear and anxiety will cause fear, and that flashback will cause automatic thoughts that are negative, and then we develop a negative mental model, or how we can use our inner speech at the physical, emotional, mental and spiritual level, that we try to transform this negative mental model to a positive mental model, and how we are going to neutralize the trigger so that the cause and effect would be that we are more calm, peaceful, free from anxiety, free from fear, free from panic attack. And that is a way forward that is achievable to every one of you. So those of you who are suffering from anxiety or depression or whatever psychological problems that we face, we have a solution within the framework of positive Islamic psychology, which inshallah, if each and every one of us, our Muslim psychologists, start thinking about this whole idea of how they're going to integrate this into our practice of our physical, our mental, our emotional and spiritual hygiene, of wellness, of balance, of achievement, of success, inshallah, we can overcome all the challenges that we face in this world. And in the next episode, I will explain to you in greater detail of how this mechanism affects us and how we can overcome anxiety using the understanding of positive development of positive mental model, overcoming the negative triggers with new positive triggers, and how the cause and effect can be positive to our life, that we are free from fear, free from worry, free from anxiety, free from OCD, free from social phobia, and inshallah we get the gift of the fulfillment, of achievement, of success, of tranquility. That is a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to all His creatures, inshallah.